Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Joseph Clough, and this is episode 728. Now, in this episode, we're going to be talking about how I personally began to overcome the feeling of being stuck, and on top of that, my anxiety as well. Because there's always a beginning phase, right? There's always a beginning phase as to transformation. So I was thinking, well, what's the best way to be able to try to support you and help you in my own journey? Because my first 18 years of my life, or maybe a couple off the first, because I didn't really know too much, I was a little baby, but as a young child, going up to my teenager years at 18 years old, I was feeling anxious and I was feeling stuck. You see, when you're anxious and worried, it paralyzes you. You're thinking of all the worst case scenarios. You're thinking of this may happen, that may happen. Am I gonna be enough? Am I gonna be worthy? Am I deserving? Am I gonna be found out? Am I gonna fail? Am I gonna get rejected? So it's quite easy to see how we would play small and stay stuck. The stuckness usually is a past effect of a mindset or a set of feelings. And as I was thinking about this title, and we're going to do this a bit deeper on a future episode, and that is, I want to kind of dive back into like the Neville Goddard stuff, or Goddard. And one of the things I always say, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled and act upon it with conviction, which is one of his quotes. So assume the feeling of having achieved your goal and then act upon it with conviction. Like, take massive action to make the change that you really want. Not just thinking, but actually do the work. So I was tracking back as to my journey. And of course, number one was, look, I had to change. No one could change me personally. People could saw that I was in pain. Like my father brought it to my attention. He said, look, I can see that you're not happy. In fact, I was living at home and I was just getting into the insurance industry at 18. It's like the only job I kind of went for. And I thought, well, I'll try and do something, right? Because I kind of dropped out of college. And I was meant to, because I wasn't that clever back then, to do some continued learning to get the certificates and things like that. And he noticed there are lots of envelopes of me, or kind of like workbooks, and in these kind of big envelopes not being opened, right? I wasn't doing the work. I was stuck. I was like, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do. I doubted my own ability to make the changes or have the kind of success that I truly desired. So we can see, and probably if you kind of paint a picture in your own life of how are you personally limiting yourself by getting in your own way? And we're not talking about other people here. We're not talking about economies. We're not talking about your employees or your bosses or your partner, or fill in the gap even of all the people or the situations like culture, economy, and so on. We're talking about personal responsibility. We're talking about that I have to do something to make the change that I desire. So my big thing about transformation, when I was growing up, when my father brought it to my attention, he offered me a way out of trying to work on that issue. But if I didn't show up, if I didn't do the work, if I didn't have that desire in my mind, even if I doubted myself, even if I felt so stuck, because one of the biggest things that gets in the way is fear, right? We live in a fear-based world. The news is mainly generations or generating fear to make us in a heightened state to buy more things. That's what it usually does, because in scarcity, we need more things. I think that's just the psychology of most news cycles these days. But then we've got all the things which happen in our life, all these social expectations. So it's quite easy for us to have fear in general, let alone if we have a deeper fears, worries, doubts, and anxieties that maybe we kind of assumed by going through certain significant emotional events. So I don't mind or know if it was 5 years old for you, 6 years old, 10 years. It could be last week for all I know. But the key is that I have got to wake up to the fact that I have got to make the change. And it's a very scary thing, but I promise you it's an absolute liberating thing. If I could speak about one subject continuously, and I do mention it quite often, is responsibility, because that is our power. That is where we regain the control. That is where we make the difference. After all, if someone just keeps on trying to fix you or tries to help you, that, although nice intentions, is very disempowering to you because you're not doing it. You are now the victim or the helpless. We want you to be the victor. So how I overcame feeling stuck and anxious and fearful and worried and having limiting beliefs about myself and my capacity and capabilities was for me to wake up that something has to change, and it's all within me to do just that. I've got to do the change just like you. See that not as a scary thing, because most people do, because they think, oh my goodness, how am I meant to do this? See this as an empowering thing, that this is your opportunity to shine. There's opportunity to wake up every single day, to have a smile on your face, excited to get out of bed, to live the life of your dreams. And they don't have to be crazy big dreams, but to me, a dream back then was just not to feel anxiety anymore. If I sometimes ask myself, like, how I know what I know in terms of my own identity. And I kind of go back to my belief system that I never felt like I was worthy, deserving, or enough, right? I never felt like I was worthy, deserving, and enough to be able to do the things that was on my heart, and or even not on my heart, because I was just deleting those opportunities. So when we get to that point of going, oh my goodness, I've got to change. And as I look back now, having made that change, I can't even relate to the younger Joseph. Like, it's just so far away now, but I don't know what it feels like. And it's weird, because I lived 18 years of the anxiety and feeling not enough. I can't even recognize that anymore. Do I sometimes doubt my ability? Yes, sometimes. Like, I'm human. I go through new challenges, new things I want to go, and things I've never done before, so there's going to be parts of me questioning. But I come and approach it from anticipation. And the reason why I say that is, you can be there too if you assume responsibility. If you decide that I'm going to do whatever it takes to overcome my fears, worries, and doubts and anxieties, and therefore, that is the first step. Now, as I began to notice, and I've said this word a couple of times, whether it be about Neville Goddard, or even I said that I assumed these outcomes. I assumed these worst case scenarios. That's what anxiety is, right? I'm assuming something that could happen that is negative. I am operating and deciding on fear, so therefore I'm assuming that feeling of fear. Now, if that's true, that it's only assumption that makes that a reality, the assumption that it is true about your identity, then we've got to flip the page. We've got to turn the tide. We've got to turn things upside down. Because as I look back as to how I changed, or how the how appeared in my life, was to assume something new. What if I stopped buying into the assumption that I wasn't enough? What if I bought into the assumption there was another way of living my life? What if I bought into the assumption that actually I could be a happy person and be even successful? Now, once I started to do that contrasting thinking, the opposite, I began to notice new thoughts. Now, did it take time? Absolutely. But do you know what? It's harder to stay the same compared to changing. I'm going to say that again. It's harder to stay the same than to change. It's harder, for example, living a life of poverty is far more painful and harder than actually trying to get yourself out of poverty. It's a weird mindset to consider, but ultimately we're living the hardness of living within the issue of anxiety and being stuck. So therefore, if that is the harder part of our life, we must begin to assume something else. And it will take time, and it will be a bit hard, but it won't be as hard as remaining the same. So what would you like to assume into your life? Now think about that. In other words, how would you like to wake up every single day? Would you like to wake up with passion and purpose? Would you like to wake up with that inner critic just disappeared and you going, do you know what? I love myself. I like myself. I'm actually worthy of getting X, Y, Z. What kind of things would you be assuming to be true if you were to have that transformation? What kind of assumptions would you make about life? Would you make assumptions different about money? That maybe the assumption is that it comes easily to me because I put in the work to make that a reality? Am I assuming better relationships? Am I assuming greater health? Am I assuming amazing things for that future self of me? You see, if I'm going to change my present self of being stuck in anxiety, I've got to assume a different position. I've just got to assume a different way. Now, the assumption, if we go a little bit deeper, and as I said, we'll probably go into a different episode about this, but the assumption comes from the I am, right? If I know I am worthy, if I know that money is a good thing that can solve problems in my life or even for those I love, if I am just so gracious and full of gratitude, what's that going to do? It's going to change everything, but it comes from the I, the identity. So you've got to really figure out in your mind if those assumptions, those examples, what I got you to just consciously think about, okay, just to consciously consider how you would like to act and feel, what it feel like to be that change, then that means it's going to bring about our identity that controls that. The identity that allows us to go, maybe I want to be a different kind of person. What identity have you assumed in your life? What story, because of that identity, has created the feeling of being anxious and stuck? Think about those things, because usually these are happening way beneath the surface. These aren't conscious thoughts. These are deep within the unconscious mind. They really, really are. They are woven into the unconscious mind, which is creating this narrative that this is the way my life is, that I'm just going to remain stuck and full of anxiety. So as you just notice an alternative assumption about your life. Just consider that. What new assumptions would you be making? What would those assumptions lead to? And then behind the assumption, what identity does that have to become within you? Now, I'm not talking about that you should fake it till you make it. I don't believe in that. I think you actually become more like an imposter to yourself. When you think about what imposter syndrome is, which is the thing that I mainly solve, which contains all the anxiety and the limiting beliefs and all those types of things. But the imposter syndrome feels like that you shouldn't be where you are. You're going to get found out. So I'm not saying to fake it until you make it, because that's not going to work. You're actually going to create more pain for yourself and actually feel more stuck and more anxious. I'm talking about assuming the identity by working and evolving your identity. You see, that identity that you presently have has positive intentions. Why is your mind at an unconscious level doing what it's doing? Why is it acting stuck? And I'm saying acting for a reason. Why is it acting anxious? And why is it acting that assumption? And why is it acting that identity? Now you might be asking yourself, why am I saying acting so much? Well, because it's not who you are. Right? You're acting out that part of you. You're acting out the fear, but you are not fear. You are not that stuckness. You are not that identity, because identity is very fluid when it comes to who we are as a person. Because if my identity was just I'm not enough, I would have stayed the same and I would not be who I am today. who is enough. So think about it that way, that you are unconsciously acting out this experience based on our past experience. But in order to change the present, you've got to assume something else to be true. Sometimes you need help with that, like a professional, someone who's really, really good at that stuff, someone who does it in, out, every day, supports people, gets them their outcome, all of that stuff. But if you don't have the ability, or you're not willing to, say, invest in yourself, you've got to make up a clear difference between the two. What am I presently assuming to be true? Because way back then, I was assuming certain realities. I was assuming I was not enough. I was assuming that I'd blush all the time. And therefore I did blush, and therefore I did get anxious. But once I started to consider an alternative assumption, an alternative me to a degree, because I could act out something else if I decided to, and then see what would happen. I began to consider what my life would be like if I were free of all my issues. What would my life be like if I just knew, and this was me personally, I don't know about for you, that I knew that I was enough? How would I be really acting? Now, if I begin to imagine that, hallucinate it in my mind, your unconscious mind, and I've done plenty of studies on this, your unconscious mind, whatever you visualize, assumes to be true to your unconscious mind. Not like 100% reality truth, but it will definitely go down that route. It will assume that to be real. And you might be thinking of some examples of this. Well, that's what you're presently doing, right? Think about it. You assume certain things about your identity, and therefore it feels anxious. You act out in an anxious way and remain stuck because it cannot tell the difference that well between that hallucinating thought of all the things going wrong in your life or being found out. So therefore we feel stuck. So as you get clear on the one level of assumptions, and then get clear on who I'm going to assume to be, what beliefs would I have if I were to be that person of transformation and living the life of my dreams, I'm going to start to go there in my mind. Now, if I were you, if I was like unable to invest in myself every single day, I would be assuming it in my mind first. I'd be walking within my mind, visualizing, seeing, hearing, feeling. I'd be trying to construct how I want to be, coming from that identity of who I am going to be. And therefore, for me personally, that I was enough, worthy, deserving, and capable, that I could be financially abundant, that I could have good relationships, I could do fill in the blank. Like, I had many goals and dreams and outcomes back then, but I had to assume it in my mind. So start to generate that internal representation and try to your very best ability to make it as real as possible. Because once you do that, your neurology is also changing. In other words, your physiology is changing. Once again, there are plenty of studies on this, plenty of them, about why just practicing certain things, visualizing certain things, it does rewire the brain and the neuroplasticity and all those kind of things by just going there in the mind. So your task, if you're not able to invest in yourself, in other words, like get professional help, your task would be to spend 10 minutes, go crazy, 30 minutes every single day, to start to assume how you'd like to be. How would that you be? How would you embody that? And therefore, you are going to start to make some changes. You're going to start to live less in the present assumption of pain and struggle and stress. And you're going to start to slowly move the mind into this new assumption of reality. And therefore, if you do that with consistency, and that's a hard thing for lots of people. Sometimes the things that we know work every single time, we stop doing for some reason. But I need you to be able to go all out. Like if you go there in the morning in your mind and start to hallucinate it. So like for example, in my program, I personally create for people these what I call create your days. Okay, they're very customized audio that is designed for the person, and it creates their day for them, who they're going to be, what they're going to get, and it just gets the unconscious mind on autopilot in making that a reality. So that is what I'd be thinking for you. I'd be thinking that if I can spend 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes on me in generating, not faking. I want to be clear on this. We're not faking it till you're making it. We're starting to move the old story of the acting out of the stuckness and the anxiety into slowly a new one. Right? That's what we're doing. And the more you assume it to be true, the more you start to relate to it, your little neural networks will be kind of firing off. Here's my example, by the way. Let's just say there's an overgrown garden. Now, if you go down that one pathway of that overgrown garden, what's going to happen? Well, after a while, that is going to be the kind of like trodden down, right? If you go back and forth every single day for like 20 minutes on this overgrown garden, that one route is going to start to be trodden down. Now think about that overgrown garden as all the little neural networks firing off, the synaptics, all those kind of things, the neuroplasticity. The more you've been thinking this way, and as I said, acting out this way, that's like the overgrown garden. It's easier to go to an anxious thought, a worried thought, a stuck thought, a belief system of I'm not enough or worthy, and it just remains that way. Well, sometimes we've got to go down a new pathway. So in your mind, imagine that rather going down that pathway of the problem or the negative assumptions, and sometimes you'll still be going down that way because you're used to it. It looks a lot easier and a lot kind of quicker, but throughout the day, you're going to start to generate a new pathway. And the more that you do it, guess what's going to happen? It's going to become easier and easier to go down the new pathway. What happens to the other pathway? Well, the less you go down that pathway of this overgrown garden, it's going to start to grow. Straight up, right? So we're making this transition from who we were to who we're going to be. And that is how I personally began to overcome feeling stuck and anxious. Yes, assume responsibility, but also use your brain, your unconscious mind to your advantage. You see, even me, and I try to do this linguistically, I try to sometimes paint images and representations in your mind, and by the nature of me doing so, you think of those things. So I'm trying to get your unconscious mind, as I speak to you, to think of the counter reality, to ask questions that you've got to fill in the gaps. And that hopefully starts your journey to freedom, to live a life that you desire in every single way. So I hope you would enjoy this episode, and I'm not going to do any call to actions to my business because I'm pretty good right now. But I just want you to know that you are amazing and you have the ability to make this change and get the help that you need if you need it. But if not, do the hard, heavy work, because staying the same is always going to be harder. With that, many thanks and goodbye.